She arrived at the building every morning before most people. The sky was usually still pale, the streets quiet, and the air cool enough to wake her fully. She liked those moments. They belonged to her alone. No questions, no judgments, no expectations. Just her steps echoing softly as she unlocked the side door and went inside. Her job was simple and unremarkable. She handled small tasks that others overlooked. Organizing files, preparing rooms, making sure things were ready before meetings began. People passed by her without really seeing her. Some nodded politely. Others didn't notice her at all. She never complained. Being invisible felt safer. She dressed neatly but plainly. Nothing that stood out. Nothing that invited attention. She kept her hair tied back, her posture calm, her movements careful. To most people, she looked like someone who had always lived a quiet life. Someone who had never taken risks or stepped into the spotlight. But that wasn't true. Long before this job, before this building and these quiet mornings, her life had been filled with sound. Not noise, but music. Deep, powerful music that could hold a room still. As a child, she had been drawn to a piano the way some people are drawn to the sea. The keys had felt like a language she already understood. She didn't need to think. Her hands simply knew where to go. By the time she was a teenager, she was performing in places most people only dreamed of. Bright lights, silent audiences, long applause that made her heart race. People called her gifted. Some called her a miracle. Others called her a future legend. She smiled, bowed, and played again, over and over. But success has a cost that few talk about. The pressure grew heavier each year. Expectations became rules. Music stopped being a place of comfort and started to feel like a cage. Every note had to be perfect. Every performance had to be better than the last. Mistakes were no longer lessons. They were failures. Then life changed her in ways applause never could. A series of personal losses, quiet disappointments, and moments of deep exhaustion slowly pulled her away from that world. The piano that once felt like a friend began to feel like a reminder of everything she couldn't fix. One day, without drama or announcement, she walked away. No farewell concert. No interviews. No explanations. She disappeared. Years later, she found herself here. In a normal job with normal hours, surrounded by people who knew nothing about her past. That was exactly how she wanted it. The silence felt kind. The routine gave her peace. Music stayed locked away in a place she rarely visited, even in her own thoughts. Still, some habits never leave. Sometimes, when she passed the conference room late in the evening, she would pause. There was an old piano there, mostly decorative, rarely used, slightly out of tune. She never touched it, never even sat on the bench. But she always noticed it. The way the light fell across the keys. The faint smell of polished wood. Her fingers would twitch without her noticing. She would stop herself and keep walking. At work, she listened more than she spoke. That made people comfortable. They talked freely around her, assuming she wasn't paying attention. She learned quickly who enjoyed power and who feared it. Who spoke kindly when it mattered and who only performed kindness when others were watching. One voice, however, was impossible to ignore. The manager. He filled every room he entered. Loud laughter, sharp jokes, confident steps. He liked to remind people of his position, often in small ways that were hard to challenge. A raised eyebrow, a dismissive comment, a joke that landed just a bit too close to insult. Most people laughed along. It was easier that way. She never laughed. Not because she was offended, but because she had learned long ago that arrogance feeds on attention. Silence, on the other hand, often unsettles it. The manager noticed her because of that. Not at first, but over time, he began to see the quiet woman who never reacted, never tried to impress, never seemed nervous around him. That bothered him more than open resistance would have. He didn't know why. One afternoon, preparations were underway for an upcoming company gathering. It was meant to impress clients. There would be speeches, formal seating, and live music. Someone mentioned hiring a pianist. Another complained about the cost. She was nearby, arranging documents on a table. Without lifting her head, she spoke softly, almost casually. "There's a piano here already," she said. "It still works." The room paused. Someone laughed nervously. Another shrugged. The manager turned toward her with a smirk, as if amused by the interruption. "And who's going to play it?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a second, a moment long enough to feel old memories stir, then settle again. "I can," she said. The laughter came quickly, not cruel at first, more surprised than anything. But the manager's laugh was louder than the rest. He leaned back, shaking his head, clearly entertained. "You?" he said, looking her up and down. "That's a good one." She didn't react. She simply met his eyes, calm and steady. "If you play the piano," he said, still laughing, "I'll resign." The words hung in the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others waited for her to back down, to smile awkwardly and say she was joking. That was the safe ending everyone expected. But she didn't smile. She didn't argue either. She just nodded. "All right," she said quietly. The laughter faded, replaced by confusion. No one knew it yet, but something had already changed. The quiet balance she had protected for years had been disturbed. The past she worked so hard to leave behind had heard its name spoken aloud. As she returned to her work, her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. For the first time in a long while, the piano was no longer just a memory. It was waiting. The days after the comment did not feel the same. On the surface, everything continued as usual. People came in, did their work, talked about deadlines and meetings, then went home. But underneath that routine, something subtle had shifted. The laughter from that moment still echoed in people's minds. Some coworkers avoided looking at her. Not out of anger, but discomfort. They did not know what to say. A few smiled awkwardly when passing by, as if reminding her that it was all just a joke. Others whispered when they thought she could not hear. "She didn't mean it seriously," one said. "She must have been joking," another replied. "No way she can actually play," someone added. She heard all of it. She always had. But she did not respond. She focused on her tasks, moving quietly from one room to another. Her face stayed calm, but inside, memories stirred like dust lifted by a sudden breeze. Sounds she had buried deep came rushing back. The feel of polished keys, the weight of silence before a performance, the breath she used to take before the first note. At night, sleep did not come easily. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside her window. Her hands rested on her chest, fingers curling slightly, as if pressing invisible keys. She tried to ignore it, tried to remind herself why she had chosen this life, why she had stepped away from music in the first place. Because it hurt, because it demanded everything, because it never allowed rest. Still, the words echoed in her mind. "If you play the piano, I'll resign." She had not asked for a challenge. She had not raised her voice or tried to prove anything. She had only spoken the truth. And now that truth was standing in front of her, asking to be seen again. At work, preparations for the event moved quickly. The company wanted everything to look impressive. Decorations were discussed. Seating plans were changed again and again. The piano in the conference room, once ignored, suddenly became a topic of conversation. Someone suggested tuning it. "Why bother?" another replied. "We're hiring a professional anyway." The manager walked by during one of these conversations, his confidence as loud as ever. "Don't worry about the piano," he said. "We'll handle it properly." His eyes flicked toward her for just a second. There was a smile on his face, but it did not reach his eyes. It was the look of someone certain he was in control. She felt no anger, only a quiet sadness. She knew that look well. She had seen it before, years ago, in people who believed talent could only exist in certain places, in certain forms, worn by certain kinds of people. She had learned then that the world often listens more to confidence than truth. A few co-workers approached her privately over the next few days. "Are you really going to do it?" one asked in a low voice. "You don't have to," another whispered. He was just showing off. She smiled gently and thanked them for their concern. She did not explain herself. There was no explanation that would make sense without revealing more than she was ready to give. Deep down, doubt crept in. Not doubt about her ability, but doubt about her heart. She had not played seriously in years. What if her hands remembered, but her spirit did not? What if the music no longer flowed the way it once had? What if stepping back into that world reopened wounds she had worked so hard to close? Late one evening, long after most people had left, she found herself standing outside the conference room. The lights were off. The hallway was quiet. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. For a long moment, she stood there, breathing slowly, grounding herself. Then she turned away. Not yet. She was not ready. The manager, on the other hand, seemed more amused as the days passed. He told the story more than once, always with dramatic gestures and exaggerated laughter. "You should have seen her face," he said to a small group near the break room. Dead serious. The group laughed along, though some looked uncomfortable. "What will you do if she actually plays?" someone joked. He waved a hand dismissively. "I'll pack my things." More laughter. But beneath the humor was something else. A need to be admired, to be untouchable. He did not see the quiet woman as a person with a past. To him, she was a symbol of safety, proof that he was always right. The day before the event arrived, the building buzzed with tension and excitement. Final checks were made. Chairs were lined up carefully. The piano had been cleaned and tuned after all, though no one admitted why. She moved through the space like a shadow, helping where needed, saying little. Her heart beat faster with every step. That evening, as she prepared to leave, she paused near the piano. The room was empty. She sat down slowly on the bench. For the first time in years, she placed her hands on the keys. They were cool beneath her fingers. She did not play. She simply rested there, eyes closed, letting the feeling return. The weight, the familiarity, the quiet promise. A single tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed by anyone but her. She wiped it away, stood up, and left the room. Tomorrow the laughter would stop, whether she was ready or not. The morning of the event arrived faster than she expected. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, as if the day itself was holding its breath. She moved through her routine slowly, carefully, as though rushing might shake something loose inside her. At work, the building felt different. Louder, brighter. People spoke with excitement in their voices, but underneath it all was tension. Everyone knew about the challenge now, even those who pretended not to. It had spread quietly, passed from one conversation to another, growing with each retelling. Some treated it like entertainment. Some treated it like an awkward secret. Very few treated it seriously. She kept her head down, helping where she was needed. She adjusted chairs, checked lists, wiped surfaces that were already clean. Her hands moved automatically, but her thoughts were far away. With every step, her heart beat faster. Not from fear of failing, from fear of remembering. The manager arrived later than usual, full of energy. He greeted people loudly, shaking hands, making jokes. He seemed relaxed, confident, certain the day would end exactly as he expected. When his eyes met hers across the room, he raised his eyebrows, amused. "Big day," he said casually. She nodded. Yes, that was all. No challenge, no argument. Her calm unsettled him, though he would never admit it. As the hours passed, guests began to arrive. Well-dressed, important-looking, speaking in polite tones. The room filled slowly, then completely. Conversations blended together into a low hum. The piano sat quietly at the front, polished and waiting. She avoided looking at it. When the event officially began, speeches followed one another. Applause came and went. She stood near the side, unseen by most, listening without really hearing. Her mind kept drifting back to another room years ago. Another audience. Another silence. Her breathing grew shallow. Then someone announced the musical portion of the evening. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. The manager stepped forward, smiling broadly. "We have arranged something special for you tonight," he said. "Live piano music." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "And since there was a bit of talk about this piano recently," he added with a grin, "we thought we'd clear that up." Soft laughter followed. He turned slightly toward her. "Would you like to come up?" Every eye shifted. The room fell silent. She felt the weight of that silence press against her chest. For a brief moment, she considered stepping back, letting someone else fill the space, letting the moment pass. But she remembered something she had once been told. That music, when ignored, does not disappear. It waits. She took a step forward, then another. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have. The distance between her and the piano felt longer than the room itself. She could feel people watching her, measuring her, deciding what kind of story this would become. The manager leaned slightly toward someone near him, whispering something that made them smile. She did not look at him. She reached the piano bench and stopped. Her hands trembled, just a little. She sat down. The bench felt familiar beneath her. The height was right. The distance from the keys felt natural, as if her body remembered even when her mind hesitated. She placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. The room waited. Some people shifted in their seats. Others leaned forward. She took one slow breath. Then she lifted her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, so soft that some people wondered if it was a mistake. Then came another, and another. The sound grew clearer, stronger, filling the room in a way that could not be ignored. The melody was gentle but certain. Each note carried intention. There was no hesitation, no searching. The whispers stopped. People straightened in their seats. She played as if the years had folded in on themselves, as if the distance between who she had been and who she was no longer mattered. Her hands moved with confidence, telling a story without words. The music rose and fell like a quiet conversation. It spoke of loss without sadness, strength without pride. It wrapped around the room, pulling everyone into the same moment. The manager's smile faded. He stood still, eyes fixed on her hands. This was not amateur playing. This was not luck. This was memory and mastery. As the piece grew more complex, her fingers moved faster, yet remained controlled. There was no show, no need to impress. Only truth. Some guests exchanged glances. Others held their breath. A few felt something tighten in their chest, though they could not explain why. She was not performing for applause. She was answering a call she had tried to ignore. When the final note faded, the silence returned. But it was different now. Heavier. Respectful. For a moment no one moved. Then applause began. Not loud at first. Just a few hands coming together slowly. Then more. And more. Until the room was filled with sound. She stood, bowing slightly, her face calm. Her eyes met the manager's. He did not laugh. He could not. Something inside him had shifted. The story he thought he was telling had changed direction. And everyone in the room could feel it. This was only the beginning. The applause did not stop quickly. It rolled through the room in waves, growing stronger as people stood from their seats. Some clapped with wide smiles. Others clapped slowly, thoughtfully, as if trying to understand what they had just witnessed. She remained standing near the piano, her hands resting gently at her sides. Her heart was racing now, not from fear, but from release. A door she had kept shut for years had opened, and there was no closing it again. When the applause finally softened, the room buzzed with quiet excitement. Voices overlapped in whispers. "Did you know? Where did she learn to play like that? That wasn't normal talent." She stepped away from the piano and moved toward the side of the room, hoping to disappear again. But invisibility was no longer an option. Several guests approached her, offering compliments. Their words were kind, but she answered briefly, politely, keeping her responses simple. She did not explain herself. She had learned long ago that explanations often invite more questions than understanding. Across the room, the manager stood frozen. His face had lost its usual color. The confidence that once filled his posture had drained away, replaced by something closer to disbelief. He replayed the moment in his mind again and again, searching for signs he had missed. There were too many. The calm voice, the steady eyes, the lack of defense. He realized too late that he had mistaken silence for weakness. Someone beside him cleared their throat. "You okay?" He nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Of course." But the words felt thin. The event continued, but the energy had shifted. The speeches that followed felt shorter. The conversations circled back to the piano again and again. Even those who tried to change the subject eventually returned to it. She stayed near the edge, observing. This was familiar territory. After performances, people often wanted a piece of the moment. She knew how to stand calmly, how to keep her distance without seeming cold. Yet something was different this time. This was not a concert hall. This was her workplace. The consequences would not end with applause. Later, when the crowd thinned, the manager approached her. His steps were slower than usual. "Careful." "I didn't know," he said. She looked at him, her expression neutral. "You didn't ask," she replied. The words were not sharp, just honest. He swallowed. "You should have said something." She shook her head gently. "It wasn't relevant." He searched her face, perhaps looking for anger, pride, or triumph. He found none of it. That unsettled him more than any confrontation would have. A pause stretched between them. "I made a promise," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. The room felt suddenly very small. He nodded again, this time more slowly. "I spoke without thinking." She met his eyes. "Words matter." He exhaled, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had built his authority on confidence and certainty. Now both felt fragile. News of the performance spread quickly beyond the room. By the next morning, people who had not attended were talking about it. Some exaggerated the details. Others repeated them carefully, as if afraid to get them wrong. "She's been hiding that talent all this time. No wonder she never bragged. Imagine what she gave up." She returned to work the next day expecting tension. She was right. People greeted her differently now, with more respect, with curiosity. Some treated her as if she had suddenly changed, though she felt exactly the same. She still organized files, still arrived early, still preferred quiet mornings. But the silence around her was no longer empty. It was attentive. The manager avoided jokes that day. His voice was softer. He listened more. People noticed. Authority, once shaken, does not recover easily. Late in the afternoon, she was asked to step into a small meeting room. Several senior staff members were there. Their expressions were serious but respectful. "We wanted to speak with you," one of them said. "About last night." She nodded, bracing herself. They asked questions, careful ones, about her background, her experience, why she had never mentioned it. She answered honestly but briefly. She spoke of burnout, of choosing peace over praise, of learning that walking away can sometimes be an act of strength. They listened. When the meeting ended, they thanked her, not just for the performance but for her professionalism. As she left the room, she felt lighter, not because she had proven something, but because she had finally allowed herself to be seen. That evening, she returned to the conference room alone. The piano was still there. She sat down and played again softly, just for herself. No audience, no challenge, only truth. The sound filled the empty space, steady and calm. For the first time in years, she did not feel the urge to stop. The future was uncertain, but it was hers again. The days that followed felt slower, as if time itself had decided to pause and watch. The building returned to its usual rhythm, but the feeling inside it had changed. Conversations were softer. Laughter sounded more thoughtful. People seemed to notice one another in ways they hadn't before. She noticed it most in the small moments. Someone holding a door open. A quiet thank you that felt genuine. A pause before a joke that once would have crossed a line. None of it was loud or dramatic, but it mattered. She continued to arrive early each morning. The pale sky still greeted her, but now it felt different. Less empty, less lonely. She no longer felt like she was hiding from the world. Instead, it felt as though she had finally stepped back into it, gently on her own terms. People no longer walked past her without seeing her. Some stopped to talk. Others simply nodded with respect. A few asked careful questions about music, about how long she had played, about whether she missed it. She answered honestly. Yes, she said. Sometimes. She did not explain everything. She didn't need to. The manager changed too. It wasn't sudden and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. He spoke less and listened more. When he did speak, his words were measured. The confidence was still there, but it no longer pushed others down to lift itself up. One afternoon, he stopped her in the hallway. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happened." She waited. "I built my reputation on being certain," he continued. "I forgot how often certainty blinds you." She studied his face. There was no show this time. No audience. "Learning does that," she said. He nodded. "I owe you more than an apology." She shook her head gently. "Just do better." Those words stayed with him. Not because they were harsh, but because they were simple. As the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Music began to return to her life in quiet ways. Not stages or spotlights, but small invitations. Someone asked if she could play during a lunch break. Another asked if she could help a child practice. At first, she hesitated. She remembered the weight of expectations, the pressure to be flawless. But this was different. This was not about proving anything. This was about sharing. One afternoon, she sat at the piano again while a few coworkers listened from a distance. She played softly, choosing simple pieces. Nothing demanding. Nothing heavy. The room felt calm. People breathed easier. She realized then that music did not have to be a battle. It did not have to hurt. Could simply exist. Outside the office, her life shifted too. She began taking walks again, letting melodies form in her head without fear. She practiced at home not for perfection but for joy. Some days she stopped after 10 minutes. Other days she played for hours. Both felt right. One evening, she found an old notebook tucked away in a drawer. Inside were notes she had written years ago. Small reminders to herself. Play honestly. Rest when needed. You are more than applause. She closed the notebook with a quiet smile. At work, leadership made changes. Subtle ones. They spoke about respect. About listening. About not underestimating people based on roles or appearances. No one mentioned her directly. They didn't need to. The lesson was clear. The manager eventually made a public statement. Not dramatic. Just honest. He acknowledged his mistake and took responsibility for his words. There was no resignation, but there was something more meaningful. Growth. People noticed. Trust began to rebuild. She did not celebrate. She simply continued being herself. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the windows, she sat alone in the conference room again. The piano waited patiently, as it always had. She placed her hands on the keys and played. The music was steady, confident, free. She realized then that her story was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about timing, about learning when to speak and when to stay silent, about understanding that walking away does not erase who you are, protects it. The world had tried to define her once. She had let it go. Now she was defining herself again, quietly, strongly, without asking for permission. The final chapter was close, and this time she was ready. The change did not announce itself with noise. It arrived quietly, the way morning light fills a room without asking permission. Days passed, then weeks, and the story that once felt heavy began to feel settled. She noticed it first in herself. The tight feeling in her chest was gone. The second-guessing had softened. She no longer replayed the past at night, wondering what she should have done differently. The music had found its place again, and so had she. At work, things felt steady. People treated one another with more care. Meetings ended with real listening instead of rushed conclusions. Mistakes were discussed calmly. Credit was shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. One afternoon, leadership asked her to join a small planning session. Not as a performer, not as a symbol, just as a voice. They wanted her thoughts on creating a more respectful culture. She spoke simply. People want to be seen, she said, not judged before they're known. The room grew quiet. They nodded. Her words stayed. Later that week, a small sign appeared near the conference room piano. It wasn't flashy. Just a simple note inviting anyone to play during breaks if they wished. No pressure. No expectations. She smiled when she saw it. The piano became a shared space. Sometimes someone played a few notes and stopped. Sometimes someone sat quietly and listened. Sometimes it stayed silent. All of it felt right. One evening, after most people had gone home, the manager stopped by the conference room. She was there playing softly. He waited by the door until she finished. "I kept my job," he said quietly. She nodded. "I know. I didn't deserve to," he added. She turned on the bench to face him. "You earned another chance by changing." He looked relieved. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't give it. You did." They shared a moment of understanding. Not friendship. Not forgiveness wrapped in ceremony. Just respect. As weeks turned into months, opportunities appeared. Not demands. Invitations. A local group asked if she would play at a small gathering. A community center asked if she would teach once a week. She said yes to some, no to others. Choosing freely felt new. At the first gathering, there were no bright lights or grand introductions. Just chairs in a circle and people waiting quietly. When she played, the music flowed easily. There was no need to impress, only to connect. She saw faces soften, shoulders relax. She remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for praise, not for titles, but for moments like this. Back at work, the story slowly faded from gossip into memory. New employees heard it secondhand, often simplified. She played once and changed the whole place. That was enough. She never corrected the details. The truth lived with her. One quiet morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The sky was pale, the building still asleep. She unlocked the side door and stepped inside. The piano waited in the dim light. She sat down and played. The music was gentle, hopeful, carried no weight from the past, only gratitude for the present. When she finished, she sat still for a moment, hands resting lightly on the keys. She thought about the challenge that had started everything. The laughter, the doubt, the silence that followed the first note. She realized something then. The moment was never about someone resigning. It was about someone remembering who they were. She stood, turned off the lights, and walked out into the morning. The world felt wide again, and she stepped into it with calm confidence, knowing she no longer needed to hide. The legend had never disappeared. She had simply been living quietly, waiting for the right moment to be heard.